Hey guys, tonight we're heading back to a time when brushing your teeth was unheard of, your mattress was a sack of straw crawling with fleas, and the biggest question of the day was, will I still have all my fingers by nightfall? Welcome to the harsh but strangely fascinating world of the medieval peasant. You'll wake before dawn, live on barley and cabbage, dodge taxes, survive plagues, or not, and get bossed around by a guy who thinks owning a helmet makes him royalty. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up when the rooster crows, or maybe when the neighbor's rooster crows, since nobody really keeps track of whose animals are whose unless they're fat enough to steal. Your body is sore, your back's a battlefield of knots, and there's a good chance you've got a flea somewhere you'd rather not mention. You're not alone either. Your spouse, maybe 3 kids, and possibly an aging parent are all crammed into the same wooden hut. And that smell? It's a blend of last night's stew, this morning's breath, and the delightful scent of wet sheep. Your bed, if you can call it that, is a sagging pile of straw stuffed into a linen sack. It crackles every time you move, and no, you're not imagining that it twitched on its own. Could be a mouse. Could be 2. The fire in the hearth has died overnight, leaving the room cold and smoky, because medieval chimneys are more suggestion than function. You cough a few times. That'll clear up. Probably. There's no alarm clock, just the sun bleeding through the cracks in the thatch roof and the lowing of hungry animals waiting outside. You shuffle to your feet and stretch, but there's no yoga mat. Just dirt. Always dirt. You splash water on your face from a wooden bucket. The water's not warm, and you're pretty sure something moved in there yesterday. But it's better than nothing. Hygiene, as you know it, doesn't exist here. Toothbrushes? No. Tooth powder? Nope. Deodorant? The goat outside smells better than most people you know. Then comes the first existential crisis of the day: boots or bare feet? Your leather boots are cracked and stiff, and you can't afford to ruin them just yet. So, it's barefoot for now. You step outside and immediately wish you hadn't. The morning dew is frigid, and there's chicken droppings where your foot just landed. Still, there's no time to complain. The Lord's fields aren't going to plow themselves. You head for the small garden plot behind your home and pull up a few turnips. They'll go into the pot later. If you're lucky, there's some barley gruel left from yesterday. You reheat it over the rekindled fire. It's bland, gray, and has the texture of wet cardboard. But it's warm, and it's food. If you want a real treat, maybe you have a sliver of cheese, aged in a way that's more accidental penicillin than gourmet. Or maybe a bit of dried fish. That is, if the cat didn't find it first. Your children wake up, tousled and dirty-faced. They've never seen a toy that wasn't a stick. One of them is trying to eat a beetle. Another's chewing on a button you swore you lost last winter. You sigh and hand them each a bit of bread. It's hard enough to double as a building material, but they gnaw away happily. Before you head to the fields, you say a quick prayer, not necessarily because you're devout, but because medieval life demands you hedge every bet. You might be in England, France, or the Holy Roman Empire, but wherever you are, religion is less comfort and more constant threat. The church watches everything. So you cross yourself and move on. Outside, the world is waking up. Smoke rises from neighboring huts. The blacksmith's hammer rings in the distance. A woman dumps a bucket of something into the street. You nod politely and keep walking. Historians still argue whether people actually tossed waste from windows with a yell or if that's just a later exaggeration. Either way, you keep your mouth shut and your eyes on the road. At the edge of your village lies the open field system, vast patches of land divided into long strips. You don't own your strip. The Lord does. You just work it. All day. For free. Okay, not entirely free, you get to live. Sometimes your plow is pulled by an ox that's more ribs than muscle. You guide it with a wooden stick and whisper encouragements that are really just grumbled insults. The soil is heavy clay. It clings to everything. Your feet, your clothes, your soul. Lunch? What lunch? If you're lucky, you packed a hunk of bread and maybe a leek. You eat standing up, trying to keep dirt out of your mouth while also scanning the sky for signs of rain. Or worse, hail. Hail means the Lord's crop gets ruined, which means your tiny allotment gets reduced even more. And hail means you'll be replowing everything tomorrow, which your knees are already dreading. A passing friar offers a blessing, You nod. He's got more lice than your sheep. But hey, you could use all the blessings you can get. Especially since the rumor going around is that there's been a sickness up in the next village. Something about people turning black and dropping dead in hours. You try not to think about it. Back at home after sundown, your muscles ache. You smell like old cabbage and fear. You light a single tallow candle, careful not to drip too much wax, it's expensive. Dinner is the same as breakfast, maybe with the addition of a rogue carrot or two. You savor it like a 5-star meal. Mostly because it might be your last. After dinner, there's not much to do. You don't read. You can. Books are rare, and your hands are too callous to turn a delicate page anyway. Instead, you tell stories. About the time lightning struck the mill. Or when old Gerald fell into the pig trough and emerged convinced he could see angels. The fire flickers low. You snuggle into the straw and hope you don't get kicked by someone rolling over. Or bitten. Or worse, summoned by the reeve to explain why your portion of the tithe looks suspiciously small this season. And so ends another typical day. You're bone-tired, hungry, and not entirely sure you'll wake up in the morning. But if you do, guess what? You'll get to do it all again. You wake before the sun again. Mostly because your stomach is louder than the rooster. It grumbles like a distant thunderstorm, reminding you that barley gruel is about as satisfying as chewing on boiled shoelaces. Still, food is food, or so you keep telling yourself. This morning, your spouse is already crouched over the hearth, coaxing life into last night's coals. The hut smells of damp straw, smoke, and something you don't dare identify. Maybe a rat died in the wall. Maybe it's just your neighbor's cooking. Either way, you're not judging. You're too hungry for that. Breakfast, if you can call it that, is more of the same. Thin gruel made from barley or oats, stretched with water and maybe thickened with yesterday's leftovers. If it's your lucky week, you might spot a chunk of turnip floating in there. If it's really your lucky week, that chunk is actually food and not something the cat dragged in. You dip a wooden spoon into the pot and swallow quickly. No savoring here. The gruel has the flavor profile of wet cardboard with notes of regret. But it warms you, and it's one of the few constants in your world. That, and the never-ending list of things that can kill you. As you eat, you notice the scratching again. Something gnawing in the pantry corner. You set your spoon down, grab a broom, and whack the floorboards. A furry blur dashes out. Congratulations, you've just lost your breakfast to a rat. And not just any rat, a medieval rat, likely brimming with fleas, attitude, and something historically referred to as the reason half of Europe died. You sigh and go back to your gruel, pretending the spoonful you salvaged hasn't been touched by rodent paws. Protein is protein, right? Across the room, your youngest is chewing on a piece of hard bread. Not because it's tasty, because it's teething friendly. You nod in approval. Bread in your household has two purposes, feeding people and sanding rough wooden furniture. Speaking of bread, let's talk about that loaf sitting on the shelf. You made it 3 days ago, back when you still had a pinch of yeast from the communal batch. It's round, dense, and weighs about as much as a cat. That's normal. Medieval bread isn't the fluffy white stuff of modern bakeries. It's coarse, dark, and sometimes, accidentally or not, made with flour ground from grain that includes twigs, bugs, and a healthy amount of mystery dust. Your flour is milled at the Lord's mill. That's not optional. You can't just grind your grain at home, that would be stealing his rights. Instead, you pay to use the mill, pay to use the oven, and pay to stay alive. And if you don't pay, well, the reeve comes knocking, and your loaf gets lighter next week. Not a great weight loss plan. Some days, the bread turns out strange. Maybe it's the grain. Maybe it's the mold. Historians still argue whether certain outbreaks of bizarre peasant behavior were caused by spiritual visions or by ergot, a fungus that grows on rye and causes hallucinations. Imagine biting into a sandwich and then seeing God, a unicorn, or your dead Uncle Charlie doing a jig in the corner. All because your sandwich was a little too authentic. But today, thankfully, your bread is just stale. No divine visitations. Just chipped teeth. You save the crusts for later. They'll soften in stew. Or not. Either way, they'll disappear. It's almost time to head out. But first, you check your food stores. You open the larder, a word that sounds fancy until you realize it's just a hole in the floor. Inside, a few onions, some dried beans, and a bit of lard wrapped in cloth. Enough to survive a few more days, maybe. Definitely not enough for a feast. You had pigs once. You remember them fondly. Then winter came, and the pigs turned into pork. You tried to preserve the meat with salt, but salt is expensive, and you didn't have much. So the pork turned into something other than pork. You don't talk about that. You glance at the chicken scratching in the yard. It eyes you with suspicion. You eye it with hunger. A few more weeks of thin stew, and one of you isn't making it to spring. The irony is, you work on a farm, your lord's farm, and you grow food every day. You dig, weed, plant, and harvest from dawn to dusk. But very little of it ever ends up in your bowl. Your job is to grow grain for the Lord's stores, tend to his animals, and maybe, just maybe, sneak a few carrots when no one's looking. Like a really overworked squirrel with taxes. This morning, you're assigned to the barley field. You and 5 other peasants form a slow-moving line, each with a bag slung over the shoulder, scattering seed across the freshly tilled earth. It's meditative in a way, until your back starts screaming and your hands go numb. You switch hands. It helps for 2 minutes. The reeve, of course, watches from a distance. Always watching. Always jotting something in that little wax tablet of his. You have no idea what it says, but you suspect it's a long list of people to find for sneezing near the wheat. You reach into your seed bag and throw another handful, this time catching a breeze that tosses it right into your face. Perfect. You sneeze. The reeve writes something down. Later in the day, you break for what might generously be called lunch. A bit of yesterday's bread, a cold leek, and a hunk of cheese so sharp it could be a weapon. You chew slowly, watching clouds roll across the gray sky. Rain threatens. Again, the guy next to you pulls out a stringy piece of meat and starts chewing. You ask what it is. He squints, shrugs, and says, "Could be rabbit. Could be something what used to bark." You decide not to ask further. Back home, you scrape together dinner from whatever hasn't molded. You boil water with herbs, mostly weeds, but they smell nice, and toss in a few beans. It's soup, technically. More of a hot water suggestion. But at least it's hot. That night, a peddler stops by. He's got dried apples, a jar of honey, and, miraculously, pepper. You haven't tasted pepper in over a year. You consider trading your cloak. It's thin and full of holes, but winter's coming. In the end, you give him a pewter spoon, a carved whistle your child no longer uses, and a solemn promise not to cough near him. You get a pinch of pepper. You sprinkle it into the soup like you're a royal chef. It doesn't make the soup taste better, but you feel like someone who matters for once. And then, just as the candle begins to sputter, you hear it again. That scratching in the pantry. A thud. A clatter. You walk over with your broom. This time, when you swing, you land a hit. The rat flops over. You stare down at it. "Dinner tomorrow?" You don't answer. You just go back to the fire, sit beside your family, and let the shadows stretch across the walls. You're tired. You're hungry. And somehow, you're still alive. You wake in the middle of the night to coughing, your spouse's, your eldest child's, maybe even your own. It rattles through the little hut like a drum roll of dread. You pull the blanket tighter around your shoulders, but it's no match for the cold creeping in through every crack in the walls. The fire's gone out again. The hearth glows faintly, little more than memory now. You should get up and stoke it. But your body refuses. You lie there, listening to the wind howling past the thatch roof, whispering promises of frostbite. Your joints ache, and your head feels hot. You hope it's just fatigue. Maybe it's a fever. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's something with a Latin name whispered in terror at market stalls and church steps. Morning comes, eventually. The sky is still dark, but the village is already stirring. Someone's goat is braying, loudly. Probably caught in a fence again. You groan and sit up. Today is tax day. The manorial reeve, blessed with a personality somewhere between a soggy cabbage and a boot to the face, has called everyone to the tithe barn. You knew it was coming. You've been counting your eggs, your onions, and your sins. 2 of the 3 might be enough to pay. You nibble some stale bread to settle your stomach. Your child is still coughing. It sounds worse today. But there's no time for sympathy. Sympathy won't convince the reeve to let you off a bushel of oats. You bundle up in your patched cloak and step outside. The mud is ankle deep, slick and cold, clinging to your toes like a debt you'll never repay. You make your way to the barn, where the rest of the village has gathered in a huddle of wool and resentment. Inside, it's chaos. Chickens flap, bags of grain shift, and somewhere in the corner, someone is crying. The reeve stands in the center, armed with a ledger. a stick for pointing, and the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. You line up. You wait. You sweat. When it's your turn, you step forward and place your offerings on the table, a sack of barley, 3 onions, and a small round of cheese that you really didn't want to part with. The reeve sniffs, pokes, and raises an eyebrow. He makes a mark in his tablet and waves you away. You've passed, for now. Back at home, you collapse onto a stool and exhale. It's not over. The church tithe is next. The church owns your soul, and a solid 10th of everything else. That's how it works. You owe 1/10 of your produce to God, delivered by way of a man who smells like incense, authority, and unearned confidence. The priest visits later that day. He doesn't ask. He just looks around your hut, makes a mental note of what might be hidden, and leaves with 2 eggs, a half-wheel of cheese, and a promise to pray for you. You're not sure what's worse, losing the food or knowing the prayers are non-refundable. You have a lot of thoughts about the church. Some good. Some complicated. The church offers comfort, sure. A sense of order in a world where bad weather and bad luck feel like punishment. But it also takes, and then takes a bit more. You remember when your neighbor's child died. The priest gave a lovely sermon and then charged a funeral fee that cost them their winter meat. You remember that because you shared your dried beans with them for 2 weeks after. You also remember how, during the last famine, the abbey still held feasts while the village scraped mold off bark. Historians still argue whether rural churches were genuinely caring community centers or mini fiefdoms run by petty kings in robes. You think it's probably both. Depends on the priest. Yours likes to scowl and mutter Latin under his breath. You're not sure he knows what he's saying, but it's impressive all the same. This evening, there's a gathering at the village green. It's not a party, exactly, no one has the energy for that, but sometimes the community comes together to share news and maybe barter goods. You bring the carved whistle your child outgrew and hope someone wants it more than they want to eat today. You trade it for a strip of dried venison. It smells faintly of leather and smoke. You plan to ration it over the week. Your child spots it and immediately asks for a bite. You sigh. You hand it over. You hear whispers in the crowd, a sickness spreading in the south, a merchant caravan attacked by bandits, another war between dukes who'll never lift a hoe in their lives. You try to ignore it all. You focus instead on the fire someone's built. It crackles warmly, drawing faces into its glow like moths to a shared illusion of comfort. A woman across the fire offers you a bowl of soup. You hesitate, it smells of garlic and desperation, but you take it. It's hot, and it's kind. 2 things in short supply. You thank her. She smiles faintly and says, "Better eat while you can." Later that night, you dream of bread that's soft, butter that doesn't taste of tallow, and a bed that doesn't rustle with life. You wake to coughing. Your own, this time. And a new day begins. You pull your cloak around your shoulders and whisper to yourself, "Survive today, and you can worry about tomorrow later." You wake to the sound of church bells, dull and slow, cutting through the morning mist like a reminder that heaven is always watching, and probably charging rent. It's Sunday, and that means no plowing, no sowing, no threshing. Just prayers, gossip, and trying not to fall asleep during the sermon. You stretch your limbs, sore from 6 days of honest labor and 1 long night on a lumpy straw mattress that smells suspiciously like goat. Which is odd, because you don't own a goat. You dress in your cleanest tunic, which is to say, the one with the least visible stains, and try to flatten your hair with water from a wooden bowl. Your spouse does the same, muttering something about the priest giving extra judgmental looks lately. You are both worried. Not about your souls, exactly. More about the priest's habit of reporting people to the reeve for laziness or ungodly demeanor. You've seen what happens to families who miss too many services. They vanish from the tithe list and reappear at the bottom of the local rumor pile. You trudge toward the church with your children in tow. Your youngest is still coughing but quiet now, tired more than sick, you hope. The air is damp and heavy, the kind that seeps into your bones. Mist coils around the low hills like smoke from a slow-burning world. The church looms ahead, a stone rectangle with a wooden door and a belfry that leans ever so slightly, as if trying to escape its own sermons. Inside, the air smells of damp stone, wax, and cold iron. You file into a pew, nodding at your neighbors. Some nod back. Some pretend not to see you. It's that kind of village. The priest steps up, eyes half closed, voice already settling into the slow chant that doubles as spiritual guidance and medieval sleep aid. You try to listen, really, you do. But the Latin washes over you like rain on a slate roof. constant, slightly depressing, and hard to translate. The sermon today is about humility. Or obedience. Or something about sheep. Honestly, it's hard to tell. You catch a phrase about fire and brimstone, another about feeding the poor, and a few pointed glances toward the miller's wife, who hasn't been seen at confession in 3 weeks. You suppress a smile. Church gossip is one of the few recreational sports available. The priest begins listing sins that might bar your soul from heaven: laziness, lying, lustful thoughts, withholding tithes, failing to fast, laughing too loudly, and, oddly specific, complaining about lentils. You shift uncomfortably. That last one feels personal. At the end of the service, you file out in silence. Outside, the villagers slowly come alive again. That's when the real business of Sunday begins. The churchyard is where alliances are made, marriages arranged, and grudges simmered like stew. A merchant's son eyes your eldest daughter, and you make a mental note to have a chat about boundaries later. Your spouse is already bartering with a neighbor, half a sack of onions for a wool cloak that's mostly holes. You pretend not to notice. If it keeps your family warm, it's a good deal. Someone mentions that the steward has raised the grain rent again. You feel your stomach knot. That's the second time this season. Historians still argue whether medieval stewards were simply enforcing quotas or inventing them for their own gain. You've stopped caring. Either way, your family eats less. You overhear someone else whispering about a sickness in the next village. Fever, boils, a smell that won't wash off. You hear the word plague, but no one says it too loud. The last time it came through, people died so fast they were buried in mass graves behind the chapel. You remember the smell. You remember the silence. Back at home, you spend the afternoon mending clothing. Mostly, your cloak has sprouted new holes, and your child's shoes are more patched than leather. You sit by the hearth with a needle and coarse thread, cursing quietly each time your fingers slip. Your spouse is spinning wool by hand, murmuring a hymn, the spindle twirling like the slow rhythm of survival. Even your oldest is put to work. They're learning to weave, clumsy at first, but improving. That's how it goes. Children here are little adults with smaller hands. There's no time for play, except when they sneak it between chores. You let them. A little joy now might buy them the strength to face tomorrow. As the sun dips, you prepare supper. It's the same as yesterday, which is also the same as most days: gruel with herbs, bread so dense you could defend your home with it, and a bit of that precious dried venison. You chew slowly, savoring the flavor, and try not to let your mind wander toward what happens when it's gone. Later, you sit outside with your spouse. The sky is clear tonight, stars blinking overhead like they know something you don't. You remember your grandfather saying the stars told stories. You wish you could read them. You speak quietly about the steward's new taxes. About the rumors of plague. About the shortage of salt. You don't say what you're both thinking: that winter is coming, and your food stores are low. Inside, your children are asleep, huddled together for warmth. You listen to their breathing and tell yourself it sounds steady. You don't check their foreheads. You're afraid to know what you'll feel. A neighbor knocks. She's worried. Her son has a fever. You offer her a bit of sage and a prayer. It's all you have. She thanks you and disappears into the dark. You sit by the hearth until the fire dies down. You poke at the coals with a stick, trying to stretch the warmth. Outside, the wind picks up, rattling the shutters. You close your eyes and listen. Tomorrow, there will be more work. More fear. More aching joints and gnawing stomachs. But for now, there's this quiet. This moment. This flicker of peace between storms. You hold it close, like a secret. Like hope. You're up before dawn again. Of course. You always are. That fine line between sleep and waking has thinned to a thread, worn down by years of scraping by and listening for trouble. And today, like most days, trouble doesn't even bother to knock, it just shows up in your front yard, tracking mud. A pig is loose. Not your pig. You don't have one. But someone's pig has gotten into your tiny garden plot and is joyfully digging up what little remained of your late summer cabbage. You rush out, barefoot and grumbling, waving a stick and muttering threats you don't have the teeth to carry out. The pig snorts, unimpressed, and trots off. Your cabbages are, for lack of a better word, pre-chewed. Welcome to peasant life, where livestock have more free will than you do. You salvage what you can, scooping up a few muddy leaves, and try not to dwell on the hunger that's going to follow in a few weeks. What's worse is that you know exactly whose pig it was: old Garwin's, the baker's brother. And no matter how obvious the tracks are, the man will deny it. Again. Last time, he swore on St. Bridget's comb, which, for the record, is just a fishbone someone nailed to a stick. As the sun finally rises, your body is already half spent. You're off to the fields today, not yours, naturally, but the Lord's. It's your corvée duty, a word that means free labor in the same way leech therapy means medieval wellness trend. You're obligated to work a certain number of days for the manor, unpaid, under the watchful eye of a man with a clipboard made of bark and the compassion of an angry weasel. Today, it's turnip harvesting. Not glamorous, not pleasant, and definitely not gentle on the lower back. You join a line of other villagers in the field, hunched over, yanking the stubby vegetables from the earth. The soil is reluctant, the turnips stubborner still. One snaps off in your hand. You sigh and dig it out by hand. You manage to catch a break at midday. Someone's brought a jug of small beer, not strong, but enough to quiet the ache. You drink it warm, sitting in a fur like a sad carrot. Nearby, a young boy picks at his blisters. He's maybe 9 years old, already bearing the hunched shape of someone twice his age. You ask him how he's holding up. He shrugs. "No rats yet," he says. "That's a good morning." You nod. You can't argue with that logic. The conversation turns to the latest storm. It tore through the next village over, flattening 2 barns and scattering chickens all the way to the woods. One of the elders claims it's punishment from above. Another thinks it's just wind. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants saw natural disasters as divine wrath or just very, very bad luck. You think it's probably both, depending on how many turnips you've lost. Afternoon work drags. Your hands are raw. The sun climbs, then falls, and you get a whole 2 turnips to take home for your trouble. You consider throwing one at the overseer's head, but you need both for dinner. And besides, he's got a stick. A real one. Not for pointing. For swinging. You limp back home through the village lane, passing houses that lean like tired old men. A few are already shuttered. One has been abandoned altogether, its roof half collapsed, weeds curling through the threshold. It belonged to a family that didn't make it through last winter. You step quietly as you pass. Back home, the hut smells of smoke and damp straw. Your spouse has managed to trade a wool scrap for a few leeks. You chop everything together, leeks, turnips, a shred of dried meat from last week, and throw it in the pot. It's a thin stew, more suggestion than substance, but it's warm. The kids eat first. You and your spouse split what's left, scraping the sides of the bowl for the illusion of seconds. You chew slowly, pretending it fills the spaces hunger has carved inside you. After dinner, you check the walls for leaks, the roof for gaps, the floor for rats. A new hole near the door suggests something with teeth has been visiting. You plug it with straw and a small rock and hope it's enough. If it isn't, well, you'll know by morning. You find your way to your sleeping mat. The stars blink faintly outside the window, cold, unreachable things. You remember when you thought they were angels, watching and guiding. Now they just seem like silent judges. You think of the pig again. And old Garwin. You think about how, just once, you'd like to catch a break, a good harvest, an uneventful winter, a lord who isn't experimenting with random new taxes for military upkeep. What army? You haven't seen a soldier in years. Unless you count the reeve, and you don't, because he once fell into a barrel of cider and had to be fished out with a rake. You close your eyes. You don't pray tonight. You're not angry. You're just tired. And praying takes energy, and hope. Right now, you have just enough of the second to make it through the week. Sleep comes eventually, layered over your exhaustion like a damp wool blanket, scratchy, but familiar. You're out before the last ember in the hearth fades to ash. And tomorrow? Tomorrow you'll wake up, patch your roof, mend your tunic, chase another pig, and try, again, to make not enough feel like plenty. You don't expect to wake up to singing. But you do. It's faint, drifting through the early mist like the ghost of a better time. Somewhere down the lane, a group of villagers are singing a work song as they gather in the common pasture. It's not cheerful, exactly, but it has a rhythm, a slow, steady pulse meant to make hauling logs and digging drainage ditches feel less soul-draining. And it almost works. You stretch your limbs, joints popping like dry twigs. The morning air is sharp and wet, clinging to your skin like regret. You feel older than you are. Everyone does. By 30, most peasants look 50. By 50, they usually aren't looking at anything anymore. You glance over at your youngest, still asleep, one dirty hand curled under their cheek. You smooth their hair back gently, ignoring the lice for now. There's something tender about these little moments, when the world hasn't yet started yelling at you to move, work, carry, obey. But the peace doesn't last. A knock at the door, more of a thud, really, interrupts the quiet. It's Celis, the Reeves' daughter, breathless and red-faced. "Your ditch is flooding," she says. You sigh. Of course it is. The drainage ditch is your responsibility this week, one of those communal duties that rotate like a bad wheel of fortune. And it's been raining for days. You grab your shovel and trudge outside, feet squelching into cold mud, and make your way to the ditch. Sure enough, water is spilling over into the path, cutting grooves into the packed earth and threatening the neighbor's sheep pen. The ditch is supposed to carry overflow to the village edge, where it can harmlessly soak into the fallow fields. But someone upstream dumped debris into it, again. Probably the tanner's apprentice, trying to get rid of scrap hide. You make a mental note to glare at him later. Maybe twice. You dig and scoop, your back already aching, water splashing up your sleeves. It's freezing. A neighbor joins in after a while, muttering that if the ditch floods the grain store again, he's moving to the next village, even though they say it's cursed by a monk with 3 eyes. Which, let's be honest, just sounds like an unfortunate birthmark. Eventually, you get the water flowing again, though the path is now a sucking mess of puddles and shoe-eating mud. You return home soaked, shivering, and not in the mood for breakfast. Which is good, because there isn't any. You gnaw the crust off yesterday's bread and drink weak ale. Water's too risky, especially since the ditch water probably just introduced some new and exciting forms of stomach failure. The day rolls on, and with it, your to-do list. You need to patch the roof, again. Thatch doesn't last, especially when your only supply is the stuff the miller didn't want. You climb up with a bundle and start weaving, hands scratched raw from the last time. The view from the roof is oddly peaceful, though. You can see all the way to the woods, dark and gently whispering. That's where the herb women go, the ones who know which roots make pain vanish and which ones send a man to heaven permanently. Or at least, that's the gossip. Down below, someone yells. You nearly drop your bundle as you scramble to see what's going on. A small crowd is gathering by the well. You hurry down and join them, heart thumping. It's never good when people start gathering without a festival. Turns out, it's a stranger. He's collapsed near the well, covered in dirt and sweat, eyes rolling. His lips are cracked, and he keeps mumbling about a village to the east, sick animals, children with fevers, coughing that won't stop. People start backing away. The whispers begin. Plague. No one says it out loud, but it settles over the crowd like a fog. You hear someone invoke Saint Sebastian under their breath. Another spits 3 times and walks away. One of the older women quietly slips a rosary into the man's limp hand. You don't know what to feel. Fear, yes. But also something colder. Something practical. You go home and start boiling water. Not because it helps, you're not sure it does, but because it feels like doing something. You add rosemary and thyme to it, and the whole hut smells like soup that forgot to be food. Your spouse sits beside you, silent. The kids are sent outside. You don't want them to see your worry. That evening, the priest comes around. Not to give blessings, he's been avoiding the sick like they're tax collectors, but to remind everyone that fasting will please the saints. You nod politely, though you're already fasting involuntarily. He asks for another tithe. You stare at him. Just stare. He leaves. Later that night, you hear coughing from 2 doors down. A long, wet sound, followed by silence. You tuck your children in early and double wrap them in blankets. You sit by the hearth with your spouse, the two of you saying nothing. Words would make it real. You think back to the last outbreak, when you were small. Your aunt died first. Then your brother. Then the black mark appeared on your father's chest. You'd never seen someone die that fast before. Or since. Until now. You stand up, pull a cloth over your face, and go out. The wind has picked up, carrying with it the smell of damp earth and wood smoke. But there's something else, faint, sour. The scent of decay just beginning. You pass the stranger's body, now covered with a shroud. No one has dared move it. Tomorrow, maybe. If anyone's brave enough. You find a quiet patch of ground near the edge of the woods and kneel, digging a small hole. You bury a charm, something your grandmother gave you. A dried clove, a feather, and a sliver of iron. Superstition? Absolutely. But when death comes knocking, you don't care how silly your locks look, you just bolt the door. You stay out there longer than you mean to, watching the stars. You think about how fragile everything is. Your health. Your food. Your roof. Even your sense of safety, all of it hanging by a thread made of string and stubbornness. Eventually, you go home. You sit beside your spouse again. This time, they take your hand. Nothing is said, because nothing needs to be. By the time morning dares to show its face, the village is different. It hasn't changed on the surface, not yet. The same crooked cottages lean against each other like weary drunkards. The pigs still root around the muddy yards, and the smoke curls lazily from hearths that haven't run out of wood. But you can feel it. A tension in the air. A silence where there used to be idle chatter. The usual sounds, chickens clucking, buckets clanking, someone yelling at a goat, are muffled. Like the village itself is holding its breath. The stranger's body is still there. They've draped him in linen and laid stones at the edges so he doesn't roll over, but no one's gone near. It's not superstition exactly, more like cautious math. If you touch a sick man and the sickness touches you back, you've made the world smaller by one more person. The priest said he'd perform rites when it's safe. You're still waiting. You go about your morning routine, but slower. You check the garden, not that anything's grown overnight, unless you count the weeds, which seem to thrive on human misery. You boil water. You try to eat. You try not to think too hard about whether the tiny tickle in your throat is nothing, or the beginning. At the communal well, people keep their distance. A rope and bucket system has always been in place, but now there are extra steps. One person draws. Another handles pouring. Everyone else waits, like they're in line for a miracle they didn't sign up for. A few are wearing sprigs of rue pinned to their clothes, a folk charm against infection. One man wears an entire garlic necklace, like he's auditioning for a vampire play no one asked for. You overhear the rumors, more sick people in the next village. A priest collapsed during mass. 2 cows foaming at the mouth. No one knows if it's the plague or just bad luck. But no one's ruling anything out either. You go back home and begin disinfecting the inside of your hut the only way you know how, smoke. You light damp herbs and wave the smoldering bundle into corners, chanting under your breath. You're not sure the chant means anything, it's mostly vowel sounds and old fears passed down through generations. But again, can't hurt. Around midday, the reeve finally makes an announcement. He climbs onto a barrel outside the tavern, waves his arms, and declares that anyone showing signs of illness must stay indoors. By order of the manor, he says. And for the safety of the village. Which is ironic, since the manor hasn't sent anyone to help. Not even a warning. Not even a cart of food. The Lord is probably holed up in his stone keep, halfway to the next county, congratulating himself for building a moat. Historians still argue whether feudal lords felt genuine responsibility for their peasants during outbreaks or just saw them as replaceable units of labor. Judging by the silence from the big house, you can guess which side your lord falls on. You spend the afternoon gathering what supplies you can. You boil nettles for tea. You find a few onions that haven't gone soft. You check your tiny stash of dried beans and find weevils dancing in the bottom. You sigh and shake them out. Protein, you mutter. Probably. That evening, the bell tolls once. One toll, drawn out, heavy. It means someone has died. You don't know who. But you'll find out tomorrow. That's how it works here, grief on a delay. You keep the children inside. They want to play with the neighbor's kids. You say no, and they sulk. You try to explain why, but how do you tell a 6-year-old that touching the wrong hand could end their life? So you distract them. You tell them a story. It's an old one, about a knight who slayed a plague beast with a blessed fork. You make it up as you go, but the kids love it. You give the beast 7 legs and a voice like a hungry cow. You give the knight wooden shoes and a sword that smells like lavender. When you reach the end, they laugh. For a moment, the heaviness lifts. Then the coughing starts. Not from them. From the neighbor's house. Low. Wet. Rhythmic. You hush the kids. You dim the fire. You listen. 3 coughs. Then 5. Then quiet. You spend the night in shifts, one of you always awake. Just in case. And just when you think you might drift off, a knock at the door. It's not the reeve, or the priest, or a neighbor. It's a woman you don't recognize, wrapped in a shawl, her eyes wide and panicked. She's from the next village over, the one you heard about. She says they've closed the road behind her. Locked it with chains and spears. Soldiers from the manor came and told them no one leaves. They were too late. Her voice trembles. She says she saw a boy die in minutes. Says a goat dropped dead mid-step. Says her father woke with blood at his mouth. She came looking for help. For medicine. for anything. You let her sit by the fire. You give her some of your nettle tea. You try not to flinch when she coughs into her sleeve. In the morning, she's gone. Not dead, just gone. Left before the sun rose. No note, no sound. Only an imprint in the straw where she sat. You don't know what to think. You burn the straw. The days blur. The deaths grow. The bell tolls daily now. Someone tries to make a tally on the chapel door, but the chalk keeps washing away in the rain. You make your own list, in your head. Too many names. And then, the fevers start. Not everyone, but enough. You boil more water. You use every herb you can name. You try the old remedy, onion slices on the feet, wrapped in wool. Your spouse laughs, weakly. You laugh too, because the other option is screaming. One night, as the wind howls and your child coughs beside you, you whisper the only prayer you can remember: let it pass over us. Let it spare us. Let it leave something behind. Because deep down, you know this is only the beginning. The worst is still to come. And you'll need every ounce of strength, not to fight it, necessarily, but to endure it. Survival isn't a battle. It's a waiting game. And right now, you're just trying to outlast the clock. You're not sure how many days it's been. Time stops behaving when death moves in. The sun rises, yes. It still sets. But everything in between, meals, chores, even sleep, melts into a single, gray smear. You go to bed not knowing what day it is, and wake up not caring. The world has shrunk to your hut, your family, and the soft thud of the bell that marks each passing life like some morbid metronome. The fever came for your neighbor 2 days ago. Or maybe 3. Her name was Ollie's. You remember that because she once gave your child a carved wooden bird. Now her house is silent. No smoke from the chimney. No movement in the yard. No one dares go in. Not even to check. You hear stories of villages that bury entire families in one pit. No prayers. No names. Just a hole and a hope that the sickness won't follow them into the ground. Historians still argue whether such mass graves were born from desperation, fear, or practicality. You suspect it was all three. You've made a charm for your doorway. Rowan branches, woven into a circle and hung above the entrance. It's supposed to ward off evil. Or spirits. Or just keep nosy neighbors away. Honestly, at this point, you'll take anything. Your spouse adds garlic. Not because it helps, but because the smell masks the fear. The children are confused. One asks why no one goes to the green anymore. Why the well is guarded. Why the man who used to sing while fishing hasn't sung in days. You don't answer. You make up stories again. Lighter ones, this time. Tales of animals that talk and hedgehogs that wear boots. You lie with them at night and hold them close, trying not to count their breaths. Because that's what it's come to, counting breaths. Coughs. Days without symptoms. Days with. The Reeve is sick now. He was the one who made the rules. Keep indoors. Stay apart. Don't touch. And now he's in his bed, whispering psalms to no one in particular. His wife burned his mattress yesterday. Then sat down and wept. Loudly, unashamed. She didn't care who heard. The priest is still healthy, somehow. But he's grown thin. Pale. He wears a mask soaked in rose water, tied at the nose with a ribbon. It makes him look like a plague bird, all beak and eyes. You see him walking the edge of the village, swinging a censer, muttering Latin phrases you don't understand. You're not sure if it helps. But he keeps doing it. At least it gives people something to watch. The manor finally sends a cart. Covered. Driven by a man who refuses to make eye contact. He unloads a few sacks of grain, some salted fish, and a jug of wine. Then he throws down a notice, hammered into a wooden plank: quarantine enforced. No entry. No exit. Upon pain of death. You don't even flinch. You drag the grain into storage. It smells old. Dusty. Possibly chewed on. You ration it carefully. 1 scoop per person. If you make it into porridge, it goes further. Add a bit of honey, if you're lucky enough to have some left, and it almost tastes like food. Your neighbor's goats are loose now. No one claims them. You watch them wander the path, sniffing at doorways, unaware of the emptiness inside. One of them starts following you around. The kids name her Matilda. You let her stay. At least someone's happy. That night, you dream of the sea. You've never seen it, but in your dream it's calm, endless, and smells like something cleaner than life. You wake up with tears in your eyes. Not because of the sea, but because in the dream, No one was coughing. The next day, the priest finally blesses the dead. He walks to the edge of the village, where a shallow pit has been dug, long and narrow, like a scar. Inside lie 6 villagers, wrapped in linen or nothing at all. He stands above it and prays. Then lights the incense. Then walks away. No one says amen. You spend the afternoon fixing your roof again. It doesn't need it. But the hammering gives your hands something to do. The rhythm is comforting. One nail. Then another. Then another. Somewhere behind you, a child cries. You don't look. That evening, the wind changes. It carries something sharp. Cold. You close the shutters early. Light the fire before the sun dips. You hold your family close and read from the one book you own, a devotional that belonged to your grandmother. The words don't matter. It's the sound that soothes. In the margins, she wrote notes. Remedies. Warnings. One of them says, if fever won't break, bury onions under the bed. You do it. Just in case. The room smells awful, but you sleep anyway. The next morning, you wake to quiet. Not peaceful quiet, empty quiet. You step outside. There's frost on the ground. Your breath curls like smoke. No birds sing. And then, movement. 2 riders. You blink, unsure if they're real. But they are, cloaked, hooded, faces hidden. They stop in the center of the village and unroll a scroll. One reads, he says the plague has passed. That the road will reopen in 3 weeks. That anyone still sick must be marked. That the manor offers condolences for the dead and encouragement for the living. Then they ride away. No one cheers. No one thanks them. You walk slowly back to your door. You look around. Half the houses are still empty. The other half, like yours, are waiting for it to really be over, because you've survived. At least, you think you have. But what do you do now? How do you start again? How do you step into a future that doesn't have a shape yet? You sit by the fire. The kids play with Matilda the goat. Your spouse hums a tune that sounds vaguely familiar. And for the first time in weeks, you exhale. The road reopens with no ceremony. No trumpet. No messenger carrying good news. Just a single wooden post, where someone has nailed a scrap of parchment. Restrictions lifted. Travel permitted. Trade resumes. It flutters in the wind like a half-hearted apology. You're not sure how to feel. You expected something more final. But the world rarely gives you tidy endings, especially not after a plague. It's more like someone forgot to blow out the candle, and now here you are, blinking in the smoke, trying to decide whether it's safe to breathe. People emerge slowly, carefully, like they're testing the air. No one throws a feast. No one dances. They just start doing things again. Fixing carts. Feeding animals. Mending fences that haven't mattered for weeks. You do the same. Your hoe finds its way back into your hands, and you turn the soil like you're trying to find answers in the dirt. The ground is cold and dry. It's not planting season, but your body needs the movement. The illusion of control. A merchant shows up. You're almost surprised, until you remember that merchants never stop for long, even for death. He's got a donkey cart with sacks of barley, some dried apples, and what he claims is French soap. It smells like wax and lies. You trade him a worn blanket and 3 onions for a sliver. Luxury. He says towns are rebuilding. That people are moving again. That there's work in the cities for those who want it. Historians still argue how much of Europe's social order shifted after plagues, whether labor shortages really empowered peasants, or whether lords just found new ways to keep people in their place. In your case, the manor hasn't said a word. But you've heard whispers. Fewer hands in the fields means more bargaining power. Maybe. Someday. For now, you stay. Because your child is laughing again. Because Matilda the goat still follows you like a shadow. Because when you look at your garden, you see green. The priest announces a Remembrance Day. He says it's important to honor the ones who didn't make it. He invites everyone to bring something to the chapel: bread, herbs, a carved token. You bring the wooden bird Ollie's once gave your child. You lay it gently beside a basket of dried lavender. The chapel smells like incense and smoke and hope. During the service, the priest says, "We are the ones who remember." You don't cry, but you want to. It feels strange to be alive when so many aren't. Survivor's guilt, they'll call it someday. Right now, it's just an ache behind your ribs. You notice the children play differently now. Their games involve burying little dolls or pretending to cast healing spells. One pretends to be a priest. Another acts out being a ghost. You want to stop them, but you don't. This is their way. Kids adapt faster than adults. They carry what we try to hide. You try to rebuild your routine, but it keeps shifting. The harvest season is strange. Too few hands, too little preparation. You work harder than ever. Your back aches, your hands blister. But you make it through. The storehouse isn't full, but it's not empty, either. The reed never recovered. He died quietly, one night, under a full moon. His wife took over some of his duties, checking grain stores, watching the roads. No one objected. No one really noticed the power shift. She just stepped in. Sometimes that's all it takes. You start teaching your child to read. Slowly. Letters scratched into dirt with a stick. You only know a few yourself, but it feels important. Like planting seeds you won't live to see grow. Winter comes, and it's mild. Almost merciful. Maybe the earth is tired of fighting. Or maybe the plague burned up all the bad luck. Either way, you take it. You sleep more. Eat better. Laugh. Sometimes you begin to notice sounds again. Birds. The clink of tools. Someone singing while hanging laundry. Life, seeping back in. But not everything returns. Some cottages remain empty. Their doors drift open in the wind. Ivy climbs through broken windows. You walk past them and try not to look. And then one morning, there's a stranger. She stands at the edge of the village. Not sick. Not begging. Just watching. Her clothes are rough spun but clean. She carries a bundle and a walking stick. You approach. She says her name is Leanne. Says she came from the north, from a village that doesn't exist anymore. She's looking for a place to stay. A place to start again. You look at the empty cottage across from yours. You say, it's not much, but it has a roof. She nods. That evening, you bring her a bowl of soup. She gives you dried berries from her pack. The next day, she helps fix the thatch. And just like that, the village begins to grow again. It's slow. A family arrives the next week. Then another. They bring stories. Wounds. Skills. A new carpenter sets up shop in the old tavern. A healer with a crooked spine starts gathering herbs from the woods. A boy who lost everyone walks the green with a wooden flute, playing songs no one taught him. It's not the same village, but it's not gone. You're not gone. One evening, as the sky burns gold and the fields sway in a warm breeze, you sit on your doorstep with your family. Matilda rests beside you. The children are chasing fireflies. The air smells like dirt and wildflowers. And for the first time in a long time, you don't feel like you're waiting. You feel like you're living. You wake up to the smell of something unfamiliar. Bread. Not the usual dense rye loaves you've grown up chewing like punishment, but real bread. Light. Airy. Someone new in the village must be a baker. You follow the scent down the lane like a cartoon character, nose in the air, feet barely touching the ground. It leads you to Leanne. She's stoking a clay oven, probably built from the ruins of a former pigsty, and grinning like she's solved hunger. She offers you a piece without asking anything in return. It's still warm. You bite in and for a moment, you forget every famine, every rationed winter, every stomachache caused by watery gruel. You ask how she made it. She shrugs. Old starter, she says. Smuggled it in a rag. Took me 3 villages to get it right again. It sounds like witchcraft. Delicious, crusty witchcraft. Famine. It's not over. Not really. Even with the plague receding, food is still precious. Fields don't plow themselves, and the dead don't harvest. You've seen villages that vanished not from illness, but from hunger. Bellies shrunk before bodies did. There's a man in town now who used to travel with a seed peddler. He talks about crop rotation, which he says means planting different things in the same field over time. Supposedly keeps the soil strong. You pretend to understand. You nod wisely. But inside, you're thinking, so we just don't plant wheat every year? Revolutionary. He also says some nobles are starting to offer land for rent, real rent. Not just permission to sweat on someone else's dirt in exchange for half your food. Historians still argue whether this actually gave peasants more power or just changed the kind of leash around their necks. Either way, the feudal lords aren't quite as smug as they used to be. Your lord, for instance, finally rides through town again. He looks older. More cautious. His entourage is smaller now. Fewer swords. More scrolls. He says he wants to help the village recover. You hear someone snort behind you. Probably the carpenter. You pretend you didn't hear it. The Lord offers a new deal, half the usual labor taxes for the next 2 years. A reward for loyalty during crisis. It's not generosity. It's survival math. Too few people left to farm his estates means he has to sweeten the deal or risk watching his wealth rot in the fields. You sign your name, well, you make your mark, on the agreement. It's not a revolution. But it's a start. You spend more time outdoors now. The sun feels less threatening, more familiar. You sit in the dirt with your youngest, who is now obsessed with finding lucky rocks. You try to explain that rocks don't really bring luck, but then she finds one shaped like a tiny heart and insists it's keeping your family safe. You don't argue. You tie it on a string and hang it by the doorway. And for weeks afterward, nothing bad happens. Coincidence? Probably. But you're not taking it down. Trade begins to trickle back in. A tinker comes through with tin cups and something called buttons that don't involve string. A spice merchant offers cinnamon, which you can't afford but pretend to recognize. The tavern reopens. Slowly. It's more a meeting place than anything, a fire, a bench, and someone who knows a few songs. There's a new bard, too. Young, with a chipped tooth and a mouthful of stories. He sings about a rat who stole a crown. About a cow who faked her own death to escape the stew pot. About a village that beat the plague by dancing every night until dawn. You know none of it's true. But you listen anyway, because even lies can keep you warm. You start seeing things differently. You stop calling yourself a peasant in your own head. You're a person. A parent. A survivor. A grower of food, a fixer of roofs, a mender of tears. Both cloth and human. The priest still delivers sermons, but they're shorter now. He tells people to be kind more than he tells them to fear. He's lost some of his zealotry and gained something softer. Perspective, maybe. Or just fatigue. You've lost people, but you've also gained something you can't name. It's like space. Breathing room. A future that's not pre-written. You still tend your patch of land, but now you try planting peas alongside the barley. You let your child draw symbols on the scarecrow's shirt to protect it from ghosts. The goat, still Matilda, has had kids of her own. 2 little brats with horns too big for their heads. They chew everything, including your only good tunic. You curse, but it's a gentle curse. The kind with a smile behind it. Then one day, a rider arrives. Dusty cloak. Longbow slung over one shoulder. He asks for your name. Not because you're in trouble. Because he says the manor is collecting records, real ones this time. Names of survivors. People who worked through the plague and kept things alive. They call it a census. A fancy word for a list. He says it's for posterity. For history. You laugh. Why would anyone want to remember this? He shrugs. Someone always does. You give him your name. Your real one. First time in a long time you've said it without mumbling. Later, you think about what else you'd like remembered. That you stayed. That you helped rebuild. That you once traded 3 onions for a miracle loaf of bread. It's been 2 years since the first death bell tolled. You can still hear it sometimes, echoing in memory, thin and distant, like a ghost rattling an old brass bowl. But today, your village sounds different. More alive. No, not louder. Just fuller. You've noticed how people have stopped whispering. Even their silences feel less afraid. The quiet now means someone is working, or thinking, or watching the sky, not bracing for the next knock on the door. There's a new rhythm to life. One that's not dictated by the manor or the church bell, but by the people themselves. A kind of communal pacing. Someone chops wood in the early morning. Another starts baking. Someone sweeps the path with a stick broom. It's not organized. It's not efficient. But it flows. You used to be scared of hunger. Now you're scared of forgetting. Not just forgetting names, or the way someone laughed, but forgetting how hard it was. Because there's something seductive about healing. It makes you want to move on, to smooth over the scars, to pretend the storm was just a dream. But you won't let yourself forget. The village doesn't either. On the anniversary of the first plague death, you all gather under the old linden tree. Someone lights a lantern for each soul lost. Children help, their fingers clumsy but reverent. A few names are read aloud. Some are just the girl in the red scarf or Tom's uncle. That's okay. It's the remembering that counts. A traveling monk passes through, muttering that the plague was God's punishment and will return if you don't repent. You politely feed him, then gently ask him to keep moving. No one argues. No one fights. But no one invites him to stay either, because you've earned your peace. You notice the seasons again. Autumn has returned, and it smells like roasted chestnuts and damp earth. Your child collects red leaves with the seriousness of a scholar. You help string them together on twine. and suddenly your cottage has garlands like something out of a noble's festival. You'd laugh, but it's too beautiful. You hear rumors of a distant rebellion. Peasants in another shire, angry about taxes, waving pitchforks and demanding justice. Historians still argue whether these early revolts were fueled by genuine class awareness or just desperation. You don't have time to ponder it. You've got beans to shell. Besides, your village is starting to figure things out in quieter ways. You and the other families have started pooling resources. A shared tool chest. A communal granary. Someone even drew up an agreement, written by candlelight, using ink made from crushed berries. You all signed with your marks. Even the goat herder. It's not perfect. Someone's always late to repay borrowed flour. Someone else keeps forgetting to latch the chicken pen. But it works. And it means something. You're not just surviving anymore. You're deciding. One of the elders suggests building a wall around the village. Not for protection from bandits, necessarily. Just for a sense of safety. The idea sparks debate. Some argue it makes you look like you're expecting trouble. Others think it's smart. In the end, you build a hedge instead. Tall, thick, full of thorns. A wall that breathes. Nature's version of a firm handshake with strangers. Then there's the question of schooling. No one here is a trained teacher, but enough of you know your letters. You take turns with the children. They gather in the chapel during rainy afternoons. They learn numbers, songs, simple Latin prayers, even some herbal lore. You hear your child recite the seasons in order and feel an absurd, overwhelming pride. You've started recording things, too. Not just ledgers or crop counts. Real stories. Little journals made from sewn scraps. You write about the goat that wouldn't stop eating laundry. About the time you thought your carrots had turned to stone, they were just frozen. About your child's first sentence, Matilda stinks. You don't know who will read them. Maybe no one. But you write anyway, because what happened mattered. Because your days mean something, even if no Lord ever notices. One crisp morning, a rider comes again. Not a census man this time. A messenger. He bears a sealed letter and a curious look. Apparently, the king wants to acknowledge the loyal labor of his subjects. Whatever that means. You open the scroll and squint. It's mostly flowery nonsense. But near the end, there's a part that makes your heart stutter, and shall be granted land rights in perpetuity, in exchange for continued stewardship. You blank. Land rights. Your land. Yours. Historians will later debate how meaningful these royal grants actually were. Many were retracted. Others were buried in red tape. But you? You hold a parchment like it's fire and gold. Even if it's symbolic, it feels real. You plant more. You dig deeper. You build a second shed. You start teaching your child how to keep bees. Why bees? Why not? Leanne gives you her old beekeeping veil. She says she's moving on. Southward. Toward her sister's place. You hug her goodbye. She presses something into your hand. It's a worn wooden spoon. You don't ask why. She just says, keep stirring. The next spring, a boy is born in the village. Not yours, but close enough. The first baby since the plague. They name him Adam. You all take turns holding him like he's a rare bird. At night, you sit on your doorstep, spoon in hand, thinking. Not about lords. Not about death. About how far you've come since the bells tolled. About how your world, small as it is, contains multitudes. And about how you better make sure that no hedge keeps out deer. Because they're the only thieves left around here. The sound of a baby crying in the distance doesn't bother you anymore. It's a good sign, actually. A sign of life. Of cycles restarting. The plague didn't take the world, it just shook it, hard enough that some things fell out and some things grew back crooked. But you? You're still here. And now there's a new Adam in the world, filling the village air with a scream that somehow sounds like hope. Your goat, Matilda, old Matilda, is still alive, if you can believe it. She moves slower now, and you swear she looks judgmental when you take too long to fetch her hay. One of her kids had kids of her own. A tiny dynasty of head-butting creatures who still chew holes in laundry lines and stare at you like they run this place. You're starting to think they do. Spring is in full swing now. The hedgerows bloom thick and fragrant, buzzing with bees from your little hives. They've survived the winter, somehow, those fat-strapped miracles. You've been reading, well, sounding out, about swarming and smokers and other concepts that make you feel like a wizard. The honey is meager, but golden. And unlike rain, it doesn't rot. One of the elders in the village swears bees carry the souls of the dead. You don't argue. You even catch yourself whispering to them when you walk by. Your fields, yes, your fields, look stronger this year. The compost experiments paid off. You now collect manure like treasure, and your neighbors trade scraps with you for mulching favors. You never thought a conversation about worm-rich soil would make you laugh. But it does. You've never been wealthier, if you measure wealth in full root cellars, sturdy boots, and a roof that doesn't leak. And yet, it's not just about the stuff. Something else has shifted. The way people look at each other. There's more eye contact now. Less deference, more sharing. The baker doesn't just sell her bread, she teaches kids how to knead. The smith doesn't just hammer out tools, he's got a second apprentice, and he lets him mess up. Slowly, messily, the village is growing. Kinder. You wonder if this is what resilience looks like. It's not glamorous. No banners, no parades. Just people repairing what's broken. Rebuilding what matters. Of course, not everything is perfect. A distant noble arrives one market day, all silk sleeves and sharp-edged smiles. He claims to have inherited rights to some of the land around here. Says his uncle died without a proper heir, which is rich, considering his uncle never once set foot here. You and the others gather. Quiet but firm. You bring out the scroll, the one with the king's seal, and lay it flat on the table. You don't speak much. You don't need to. The noble grumbles something about clarifying legal boundaries and leaves on his pristine horse, trailing empty threats like dust. You stand a little straighter after that. Historians still argue whether royal charters given to peasants were legally binding or just hopeful scraps. But no historian has ever seen the way your village stared down a noble with muddy boots and calloused hands and didn't flinch. You build a kiln. Why? Because someone remembered how. Because bricks are better than wattle in the long run. Because you're tired of patching the same holes in the same walls with straw and prayers. Brick by brick, you lay your future. Literal bricks. Your child helps. She's grown taller, and her voice is strong when she reads from scraps of parchment. One day, she recites the names from the memorial list by heart. You ask her how she memorized so many. She shrugs. They were ours. You try not to cry. You fail, but quietly. There's talk of sending someone to the abbey for formal learning. A boy, maybe, or one of the older girls who's taken to scribbling animal stories in the margins of church flyers. Education used to be a dream. Now it's a real topic. A line in the village meeting. Yes, your village has meetings now. Actual gatherings. You sit on wooden stools and argue about grain rotation and whether pigs should be allowed near the river. Someone proposes building a communal bathhouse. Everyone laughs. Then someone else says, no, really, and suddenly it's a committee. You don't always agree. But you agree to keep trying. The seasons pass in a blur of manageable problems. Crops, fences, illness, the usual. But now, when someone falls sick, they're not left alone. Neighbors show up with broth, dried herbs, or just stories. You don't heal faster, necessarily. But you suffer less. That counts for something. A traveler arrives one midsummer evening. Claims to be a physician, or maybe just a clever fraud. He talks about miasmas and insists fresh air wards off disease. He has this thing, like a pipe filled with mint and herbs, that he wears around his neck. He calls it a plague posy. You don't trust him. But you do start sleeping with the windows open. Small changes. Big impacts. Another autumn. More births. A few quiet deaths. No plague. You plant apple trees, though they won't fruit for years. You fence them carefully, build small wooden tags with names burned in. Hope. Leanne's branch. Stubborn one. Someone asks if you're naming trees now. You say yes. Why not? Because survival isn't just about staying alive. It's about what you do with being alive. So you teach. You farm. You mend. You laugh. Loud and often. And when night falls, you listen to the wind in the trees and the bees humming in their hives and think, maybe this is what a legacy sounds like. You wake before sunrise now, not because you have to, but because you want to. There's a peace to that early hush, before the roosters remember they exist. The hearth crackles softly, the embers from last night still warm. You stretch, not quite sore anymore, just used. Like a tool that's been shaped to its task. There's porridge on the stove. Not rich, but hearty. You stir in a little honey from your own hives and crush a dried plum with your thumb. Your child mumbles awake from the loft, and soon the cottage is filled with the domestic music of spoons and yawns in mismatched socks. Today is market day. Your village holds its own now. No longer dependent on traveling fairs or a nearby manor's schedule. Once a month, stalls bloom like mushrooms in the clearing near the old church ruins. Someone even built a wooden arch over the path and carved gathering into it. It's misspelled, but charming. You pack your wares, little wax-dipped candles, dry time bundles, and some wool spun from the village sheep. Not fancy, but useful. That's the new currency, usefulness and kindness. Other villages send their own folks now. A wheelwright from 3 hills over. A brewer with foamy ale in stopper jugs. A woman selling soap that smells like rosemary and something mysterious, she won't say what, claims it's a secret passed down from her grandmother who once talked to fairies. The bartering is relaxed, almost chatty. No hard sells. No shouting. Just quiet exchanges and the clink of iron bits when absolutely necessary. One boy trades a single song for a spool of bright red thread. No one questions it. The song is lovely. You swap a jar of your honey for a smooth bone comb. Your hair's longer these days. And cleaner. Bathing's not a luxury anymore, it's regular, thanks to that bathhouse committee you didn't think would follow through. They did. You even helped tile the floor. Progress is a slow, muddy march. But it marches nonetheless. You hear news from the wider world. Nothing immediate, but ripples reach you. A minor war somewhere east. Something about inheritance again. Land disputes that, thankfully, don't touch your corner of the earth. The king is ill. Or maybe it's his cousin. Or both. Historians still argue over the legitimacy of that particular succession. But out here, the only thrones are stools. The only decrees are whether to plant carrots or cabbage. Still, the world creeps in. A scribe visits the market, offering to copy documents for a few coins. He sets up under a cloth tent with faded ecclesiastical symbols and writes with a careful, looping hand. You ask him to copy your land grant, just in case. He does, and throws in a free doodle of a goat in the corner when he hears Matilda's name. She's famous, somehow. Your daughter talks to the scribe for nearly an hour. Asks about letters. About books. About libraries. Her eyes glow. Later, you find her scribbling symbols in dirt with a stick. Not quite Latin. Not quite right. But you see it, the yearning. The wonder. You don't stop her. You join her. It's odd, how the plague reset everything. Flattened the hierarchy, at least in pockets like this. Not because of rebellion. Not from violence. But from silence. From absence. So many gone that the ones who remained had to find new ways to live together. Like children building sandcastles from ruins. There's something radical in that. Historians will say the feudal system eventually reasserted itself. That serfdom morphed, evolved, found new names. That most peasants stayed poor, but they never lived here. Not like you. They never stood in the middle of a green full of laughter and grilled onions, watching a fiddle player coax joy from strings while someone's goat nibbled unattended bread. They never saw your child learn to read from a church hymn and then write her name in wax on the wall just because she could. They never shared warm cider with neighbors who once barely knew each other's names, and now knit baby socks for children who aren't even theirs. No, history won't remember all of this. But you will. You remember that the midwife now lives in the old priest's house. That her chickens roost in the nave and nobody minds. You remember the day someone painted a sun on the door of every cottage, not for religion, just to remind everyone what still rises. You remember the night the stars fell like rain, just a meteor shower, perhaps, but someone claimed it was a sign of blessing. No one questioned it. Not after everything. And you remember what the silence sounded like. Back when the plague had eaten all the noise. You don't talk about those days much anymore. Not because they're gone. But because they live in you now. Woven into your days like thread. You think about time differently these days. Not in seasons, but in growth. The hedges are thicker. The orchard now has 3 kinds of apples. The bees survived again. That's time, too. You plant garlic today. A good crop, hardy and stubborn. Like you. You hum while you do it. The rains come earlier this year. Not a problem, really, just wet. Everything smells like turned earth and moss and the faint tang of wool that's tried its best to stay dry and failed. Your boots squelch. The roof drips in one corner. But honestly, it's almost comforting now. Familiar. You've gotten good at spotting trouble early, soft spots in the path, clouds gathering the wrong shade of gray. You've grown cautious, sure, but not fearful. Experience breeds patience, not paranoia. You tend the paths leading from the village with others, packing gravel, laying planks, laughing about how everyone used to avoid this kind of communal work like it was a punishment. Now, it's practically a social club. Someone even brought warm cider. Again, you build new habits. Like sharpening tools every other Sunday. Like carrying blankets in the midday sun. Like listening, really listening, when someone says they don't feel quite right. That last one saved a life last month. Old Jacob, the carpenter, woke up feverish. Years ago, that would have meant quiet dread and a wide berth. But now? You and the herbalist got to him fast. Willow bark tea, cold cloths, soup, and a rotating watch of volunteers who made sure his goats were fed and his fire stayed lit. He's still coughing a bit, but he's upright. Carving again. Smiles more now. He says it's like dying reminded him he liked being alive. You're not sure that makes sense, but you nod. Not everything has to. There's a visitor from the coast today. She arrives wrapped in oilskin, smelling of salt and spices. Claims to be a merchant's daughter, or maybe just a runaway with a good memory and a pouch full of dried figs. She tells stories around the fire, of ships that sail beyond sight, of cities where people speak 5 languages before breakfast, of glass windows and silk that smells like roses. You listen, chin in hand, trying to imagine such absurd luxury. And then you notice something. You're not envious. Not really. Just curious. Because your life, muddy and modest as it is, has its own glimmers of wealth. Like your neighbor's laugh when he forgets the words to a song and invents new ones. Like the steam rising off your own shoulders in the bathhouse you helped build. Like the feeling of wool mittens that you knit, fitting your hands like memory. Historians still argue whether commoners after the plague really experienced a better life, or if it was just less bad. But that's missing the point. Your life isn't about better or worse anymore. It's about real, tangible, touchable. The coffee nursed. The bread you shared. The day you watched geese fly low and knew a storm was coming 3 hours before it hit. The village school, yes, you have a school now, sits in the old storehouse. 3 benches, 1 bell, and a chalkboard that was someone's old slate roof tile turned sideways. The children learn sums, letters, and the art of dodging the goat who keeps wandering in. Your daughter writes a poem about that goat. You swear it makes your eyes water. The teacher is a former scribe who lost most of his eyesight in one eye but none of his passion. He teaches by feel now, tracing letters into open palms, reciting Latin phrases like lullabies. He says education isn't about facts, it's about possibility. You believe him, because now you dream. Not of castles or miracles, but of clever improvements, a better water wheel, a stronger roof beam, a way to keep apples from bruising in storage. Dreams rooted in your own 2 hands. You've started keeping a little journal. Nothing fancy, just notes, drawings, ideas. You write about the taste of turnips after the first frost. You sketch your daughter's face when she sleeps, nose wrinkled, mouth slightly open. You record the names of neighbors who make you laugh. You draw plans for a new kind of chicken coop. You show it to no one, but you flip through it sometimes, tracing the pages with your fingertips like they might hum. You're thinking of planting berries next year. Raspberries, maybe. A neighbor offered clippings. You'll need to dig out the old stumps behind your cottage. It'll be work, but satisfying. Work has stopped feeling like punishment. Winter comes slow this time. The nights stretch longer, the sun dragging its feet, but you welcome it. Time to rest. To reflect. To mend what frayed. You repair an old pair of mittens with blue thread. They look ridiculous. They're perfect. Your daughter hangs dried orange slices on the windows. Claims it keeps ghosts and gloomy thoughts away. You let her. It might work. Every evening, the village gathers in the long hall, built last spring with beams scavenged from a ruined barn. It's warm, if smoky. Someone plays the lute. Someone else reads aloud from a translated fable about a fox who outwits a priest. You're not sure the priest likes it, but he laughs too. You fall asleep in your chair sometimes, lulled by the crackle of fire and the comforting hum of voices around you. That's safety, you realize. Falling asleep without bracing for bad news. No one talks about the plague anymore, but it's there. In every cleared field. In every rebuilt roof. In every baby born with a middle name borrowed from someone lost. It shaped you, but it doesn't own you. You own your life now. Even on cold mornings when your knees ache. Even when the cheese goes moldy too fast or the hay mildews in the shed. Even when the pigs escape, again, and you chase them yelling curses that would make a bishop blush. You own all of it. And it is enough. More than enough. The year turns again. Frost feathers the edges of the window panes, delicate as lace. The fire pops quietly. You're up before dawn again. Not from worry, just routine. It's amazing how your body has learned the rhythm of this new life. You no longer need church bells to mark time. You read it in the sky, in the scent of the air, in the way the chickens act when a storm's coming. You sip warm broth and watch the slow blush of pink spill over the hills. You used to hate winter. It meant hardship, hunger, loneliness. But now it's time to slow down, breathe deeper, reflect. The larder is full. The neighbors are close. The hall still glows each evening with fire and music and a low murmur of shared memory. You see the seasons not as threats, but as chapters. And you've made it through many. This year, the village votes to expand the common fields. Votes. Yes, that's a thing now. It started small, just a show of hands about whether the pigs should be fenced away from the churchyard. But it grew. Now there's a council of sorts. Rotating members. You even served last autumn, mostly keeping track of who borrowed tools and who owed whom firewood. Not glamorous, but important and strangely satisfying. No lords. No bailiffs. No distant landowners. Just people deciding together. Historians still argue whether peasant self-governance in the post-plague years had any lasting effect. Some say it was a fluke, a hiccup in the system before the nobility tightened their grip again. But here, in your village, it's real. You can touch it. You can taste it, in the fresh bread someone baked from shared grain, in the cider pressed in the new communal mill. You can hear it in the way folks argue over goat grazing boundaries without knives, without feuds, without burning anything down. Progress isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just quiet. You spend more time with your daughter now. She's taller, smarter. She writes little plays that the village kids perform with mismatched cloaks and paper crowns. You act in one-ones, as a talking pumpkin. The audience loved it. You've never lived it down. She's talking about going to the Abbey School 2 towns over. The one that started taking common-born children who can already read and write. She's nervous. You're nervous. But you tell her yes. You tell her go. Learn everything. Bring it home. You want her to live in a world bigger than mud and fences and firewood. And you've helped build the path toward that world. Sometimes you think about the early days. When the sickness crept in like a fog. When you buried more than you named. When hope was a thin thread and grief was a stone you carried inside your chest. But you don't live in those days anymore. You live here. Now. In a cottage patched and repaired 100 times, with a floor swept clean and herbs drying in the rafters. In a village that laughs more than it mourns. With a sky that still opens wide each morning like a promise. You learned, over the years, that survival isn't just about food or shelter. It's about connection. It's about knowing someone will bring you soup if you fall ill. That someone will miss you if you don't show up to mend fences. That someone will notice your sadness before it festers. That's wealth. That's freedom. That's what the plague couldn't destroy. You're older now, not old, necessarily. Just seasoned. Like an oak that stood through 20 winters and carries snow on its branches like a crown. Your back aches. Your hands are calloused. But your heart beats calm. Slow. Steady. You write in your journal tonight. Not much, just a line. We made it. And somehow, that's enough. Wind down, final 300 words. The fire is down to embers now, soft and pulsing like the slow rhythm of a breath just before sleep. You lean back in your chair, blanket pulled up to your chin, eyes half closed. Outside, snow begins to fall, not the biting kind, but the gentle kind that hushes the world. You can almost hear it settling on the thatched roof, on the trees, on the earth itself. Everything is quiet. Everything is still. Your world, once frantic, once filled with fear, now moves at the pace of the seasons. Of stars. Of seeds waiting patiently beneath the soil. You think of the fields in spring, the hum of bees, the laughter of children chasing chickens through the mud. You think of long summer evenings, of firelight on faces, of stories passed from tongue to tongue like heirlooms. You think of harvest, of heavy baskets and aching backs and that pure, warm joy of enough. You think of winter again. Not as a threat, but as a lullaby. The wind outside hums low, like an old song with no words. Your breath slows to match it. One in, one out. One in, one out. Safe home. Together. The past may whisper, but it no longer haunts. You are here now. And you are whole. So rest. Let the world turn without you for a while. You've done more than survive. You've lived. And that is beautiful. End of script. Sweet dreams.
dàn tới đây luôn á. Lấy máy là quay gửi cho anh Thịnh.
Quay nó có đỏ đâu, không quay không có đỏ. Má xịt kìa, cái máy này quay đâu.
Thì chớp chớp nhán nhán được rồi. dàn tới đây luôn á. Lấy máy là quay gửi cho anh Thịnh.
quay nó không có rõ đâu, không quay lại không có rõ. Nói xịn thì chứ nói này quay đâu.
Thì chớp chớp nhán nhán được rồi. Dàn tới đây luôn á. Lấy máy là quay gửi cho anh Thịnh.
quay
chớp chớp nhán nhán được rồi. dàn tới đây luôn á. Lấy máy là quay gửi cho anh Thịnh.
quay nó không có đỏ đâu, không quay không có đỏ, nói xịn kìa chứ nói vậy rồi đâu.
Thì chớp chớp nhán nhán được rồi. tới đây luôn á. Lấy máy là quay gửi cho anh Thịnh.
quay nó không có đỏ đâu, không quay nó không có đỏ. Nói xịn kìa chứ nói vậy rồi đâu.
Thì chớp nhán nhán được rồi. Dàn tới đây luôn á. Lấy máy là quay gửi cho anh Thịnh.
quay nó
chớp nhán nhán được rồi. dàn tới đây luôn á. Lấy máy là quay gửi cho anh Thịnh.
quay nó có đỏ đâu, không quay không có đỏ. Nói xịn thì nói này quay đâu.
Thì chớp chớp nhán nhán